Welcome everyone to webinar number approximately 85, I think, but the seminar number 211 in our series. And it's great to be able to talk about university rankings with Igor Chirikov today. His topic is, does conflict of interest distort global university rankings? Controversial and really important discussion, this one. Let me take you through the webinar protocols and then I'll introduce Igor properly. Remember that the webinar is being recorded, so all these terrible things you say about the rankers are going to be on YouTube for all time, as long as YouTube lasts anyway. And will also be on our website in 48 hours or so. A transcript of the chat function will also be posted on our website. Now, during the webinar, please keep yourself muted unless you have been asked to speak or ask a question. There's no need to have your video on during the webinar, but we advise you to turn it on when you're going to ask your question. It makes it more interesting for everyone, I think, so they can see you. We recommend using the speaker view while you're in Zoom, because then you can see clearly who's talking at any given time. Now, to ask a question, and we very much welcome Q&A, it's the most important part of our webinars, use the chat function, post your question there. You may want to make a statement rather than ask a question. You're also welcome to do that, but indicate to us what you want to say so that we'll be able to select you into the Q&A. We can pose the Q&A on the basis of what appears in the chat. When we get to the stage of the Q&A itself, and we invite you to ask your question, you please unmute yourself first, switch on your video, and then when you come in, state your name and where you are from. Great pleasure to introduce Igor Chirikov, a colleague of some few years standing now, and we first met each other when Igor was at the High School of Economics in Moscow, where he was eventually vice rector, and he's now working as a senior researcher and SCRU consortium director at the Center for Studies in Higher Education at UC Berkeley. The Center for Studies in Higher Education at UC Berkeley is one of the foundational nodes of higher education studies worldwide. It's the most important place. We're really pleased to see Igor there these days. His research involves student experience and learning outcomes, the use of technology in universities, and international and comparative higher education. And he's already pretty well published in the literature. Igor, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Simon, for such a nice introduction. Let me share my screen and I'll start. Yeah. Can you see the slides now?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So greetings, everyone. And Simon, I'd like to say that my last visit to the Center for Global Higher Education a few years ago was a much more pleasant. It was, I remember it was a warm London evening, and it's a bit hard to believe, but I distinctly remember being in a room with the actual people. Yes. And instead now, for some reason today, I'm in front of my computer and it's 6 a.m. in the morning. And but obviously the advantage is to have so many people from different parts of the world. And I appreciate you joining me today. Though I need to disclose that I'm not a morning person, so bear with me. Just a second. So my talk today is based on the working paper that I published last month in the Research and Occasional Paper series at the Center for Studies in Higher Education at UC Berkeley. It's freely available on eScholarship. Here's the link on the screen. I can try and send it in chat as well, I guess. Here it is. So today I'll skip some technical details that you can read in the paper, so we can, engage more in the discussion. Again, it's still very much kind of a work in progress, and I appreciate your comments and suggestions. There's obviously a room for improvement. So here's a preview of the study. I'm sure that most of you know that all major ranking companies, and I would refer to them as rankers today, they not only evaluate universities, but also provide them with consulting, analytics, advertising, and other types of services. And when they do that, they face conflict of interest similar to other organizations. It's not uncommon. And in the paper, I try to understand whether contracting with rankers actually improves university ranking outcomes, regardless of improvements in their institutional quality. And that part is important. It's kind of a, I try to use quasi-experimental methods like difference and difference and match data on the positions of Russian universities in QS, World University Rankings. And on the other hand, contracts these universities had with the US. I compared two groups of Russian universities, those that frequently contracted with QS for services and those that never or seldomly contracted them for services. And I find in the study, I find that positions of Russian universities that had frequent QS related contract increased on 0.75 standard deviations. This is approximately 140 ranking positions in the World University Ranking. So they increased more than they would have been they would have increased without such contracts. And I also find the same thing for faculty student ratio scores, and even larger, the effect is even larger. And together, these findings suggest that conflict of interest may produce kind of significant distortions in global university rankings. Now, let's get to the details of the study. So why study conflict of interest in the first place? So the overall legitimacy or credibility of rankings is based on the belief that rankers provide kind of a impartial information for students and universities and governments, and it's implied that all universities are evaluated equitably, or at least according to a uniform set of criteria, maybe biased, but still kind of a uniform set of criteria. And rankers, they position themselves in this process as kind of impartial arbiters. But we also know that rankers, as I said, they all kind of rankings produced by for-profit organizations. And when for-profit organizations evaluate universities and offer them fee-based services, they face conflict of interest. Again, if you look at other sectors of economy, there is a robust evidence that, and I discussed that in the paper, that conflict of interest distort evaluations. And for example, there was a paper by a recent Nobel laureate in economics, Esther Duflo, and her colleagues. They did a great study where they studied environmental audit in India, and they found that third-party auditors who are chosen and paid by the firms, they found systematically underreport plant emissions. And so there also a lot of evidence from other industries, from medical sector, from sports, from financial sector. And I'm wondering if the same is true for university rankings. And if it's true, then rankings may be misinforming prospective students, universities, governments, and that may negatively impact educational choices. There are a number of countries that use rankings as part of the immigration procedures and point-based kind of an immigration system, and also hiring decisions at universities or maybe even businesses that are also use rankings as a criteria. What do we actually know about rankers business models and the impact on rankings? Surprisingly, our knowledge is in this area is quite limited. So first of all, university rankers claim that conflict of interest does not affect ranking process. and that there are internal procedures in place to prevent consulting and advertising services from influencing ranking outcomes. And most rankings also claim there are external audits. They establish advisory boards to make sure that the processes are transparent and unbiased. But basically, they ask the whole sector to take their word for it and just trust them that everything is working well. And you can do that. That's of course possible, but it's always nice to also look at data, what data shows. And also thanks for thanks to emergence stream of the literature and what's called ranking entrepreneurship. And here I would like to quote papers by Miguel Lim and Helena Brankovic, who I believe they registered, but I don't know if they are actually attending. But these are great papers, and I really enjoyed reading them. So we actually know a little bit about their business models, and usually those lists of rankings, they're publicly available. They're usually sold at a loss, and the goal of this list is to generate revenue from other business activities, for example, by selling additional data or consulting or other services to the ranked universities. And rankers, they employ a variety of strategies to promote kind of a sense of constant and intense global competition in higher education. So to rise the the level of anxiety among university administrators. This is a competitive field. And basically they then position their services as kind of a part of the solution to this problem of intense global competition. In addition to that, there's not so much in the area published with empirical data on the conflict of interest, and there's one exception here, and it's an amazing story. There is another, the same week as my working paper was published last month, there was another paper published completely independently by a French economist, Julien Jacquemin. And that paper looks at the relationship between university advertising in the Times Higher Ed magazine and their place in the rankings, in the Times Higher Ed rankings. Again, completely independent. We haven't communicated before. We started to communicate after. I'm not sure if Julien is attending. If so, I say hi and I encourage you to read his paper. His paper identified that there is a statistically significant correlation between advertising and Times Higher Ed rankings, but it's not clear still if this because universities just became better and advertised at the same time, or because the contracts affected rankings. And this is what I try to do in my study. I try to understand the relationship between contracting with rankers and also understand the mechanism behind the influence, how it influences the ranking outcomes. If you look outside of the higher ed literature, there is actually extensive, research on conflict of interest in corporate audit, and I think it provides a good guidance for this particular study. So auditors, for those of you who are not familiar with this, they are paid by firms and they independently examine firms' financial statements, so that investors can make sure that the statements are reliable, they're valid, they're accurate, and the work of university rankers includes an important auditing component. So at the core of these activities, especially for QS, but also for other rankers as well, they need to make sure that data provided from universities or third-party kind of a data providers is accurate and it aligns with the methodology they established for rankings. And there are two major takeaways from this literature on corporate audits. First, this research finds that the negative impact of conflicts of interest on quality of audit reports is pervasive. And for example, the model of issuer paid kind of rating agencies. This is where, you know, corporations or government who seek funds, they pay for credit ratings. This has been identified as a critical factor that led to inaccurate ratings and eventually to the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. And second, and this is more important, distortions in corporate audit are produced by the unconscious self-serving bias and other structural aspects of accounting profession rather than corruption and fraud. For those of you who are hoping that I will tell you a corruption story today, I will not. This is probably not a corruption, and this is actually worse, because if it's a corruption, then it's, you know, it could be identified and fixed and who was involved and others are not involved. But this is actually worse, because this is actually this is integral to the business model that commercial rankers have, the self-serving bias and other aspects of rankers' profession. So self-serving bias is when, you know, individual perception of the situation altered by, you know, by the role of this individual in that situation. And the literature on corporate audits believe that this is a major factor, you know, behind distorted audit reports. And there are three elements of the profession, of the auditor profession, that reinforce this. This is ambiguity. It's the possibility of interpreting information in different ways. So when data is, you know, is vague, the criteria is vague, there is always ambiguity. It's attachment. Auditors are interested in developing long-term relationship with clients and that allow them to sell basically additional consulting services and approval. So auditors do not produce their own accounting. Instead, they endorse kind of or reject clients' accounting. And that creates even more bias when they do that. So, and a lot of these elements are also kind of true for rankers as well. Now, very briefly about the setting of the study. So basically, QS is I study QS rankings. QS is a very successful business. My congratulations. And their main rankings are QS World University Rankings. But I wouldn't be discussing the whole methodology. The main thing I would like to note is that 20% of rankings is faculty-student ratio, and it's important, you know, for the design of the study. Why was QS chosen? Why I've chosen QS for the study? So first of all, the business model relies on the university of income from universities much more than other rankers, like Times Higher Ed or US News. And second, there was data available on contracts between Russian universities and QS. And Russian universities had more contracts with QS than with any other rankers. And third, QS has been frequently called out by media outlets, by higher education experts for having and not properly reporting the conflict of interest. So it's interesting to see what kind of the data tells us. So as for the data, I use 4 sources of data. So my sample includes 28 Russian universities that appear in 2021 QS World Rankings. And I constructed my data set from 4 sources of data. So I use their rankings. I use their faculty-student ratio scores from 2016 to 2021. I also use their rankings in Times Higher Ed. And also this is important because I kind of use Times Higher Ed as a baseline in some of the analysis from 2016 to 21, also ranks and also faculty student scores. I also use the data from national statistics for the same universities. It's possible to track a similar indicator, faculty student ratio, and also university income. And also the key part here is that Russian universities are required to publicly report all the large contracts they have with anyone, including QS. And at this Russian kind of a portal of government procurements, so I found 128 QS related contracts between universities, with universities. between 2013 and 2020. And as you see, Russian universities spend almost $4 million on QS-related services during this period. I'm interested in two outcome variables. First is the change in overall ranking in the QS World University rankings from 16 to 21, and also change in QS faculty student ratio score during the same period. So a few words about methods, and I use two kind of types of a combination of methods. I first look at this descriptively, and I compare two groups, those universities who had a frequent QS-related contracts, which mean more than one per year during a 5-year period, and those who had like rare or not as frequently contracted for QS-related services. And I can compare those two groups with Mann-Whitney test, with permutation test, which basically assigns a label if a university was paying, with frequently paying for QS-related services or not, and then compares, this permutation from 10,000 kind of a simulation. And I also use a kind of as a robustness check. In addition to comparing two groups, I also use the basic regression models with the number of contracts to see if the number of contracts is related to progress in rankings, not only these two groups. And again, the study is kind of a quasi-experimental. I try to estimate what the rankings of universities who frequently contracted for QS services would be if they have not paid QS for the services. And in doing that, there are multiple methods to do that. But one of the most common is called difference in difference. And here on the right, you see kind of a graphical. This is not from my study. This is just from, this is just to explain how this method works. So basically, I am interested in finding what the rankings of the screen, the screen counterfactual, what the rankings in QS would be if not for the contracts. And I use actually three models. The first model, I try to compare again two groups: frequent clients and occasional non-clients. These are this will be, for example, frequent clients, and this will be occasional non-clients. And I compare QS rankings and times high-red rankings. So QS rankings here times high-red will be baseline, and QS will be here. And the second model, I do the same, only with comparing faculty-student ratio scores in QS rankings. And as a baseline, I use two baselines. One is the data reported by the national statistics, and also data on faculty-student ratio scores in times high-red. And basically, the intuition behind that is that if faculty-student ratio scores of universities change, they have to change in a similar way across this different data sources, right? So, for example, imagine a university is improving on student-faculty ratio score in QS ranking. I would expect that the same is happening in times high-red, or a similar trend at least, and also in the national statistics. So that's the setup. So now to the results. Basically, what I find is that the difference between universities that had frequent QS-related contracts and universities that never seldomly contract for QS is statistically significant, both for changing QS rankings and change in QS student-faculty ratio score. And here you see also the regression model that shows that the number of QS-related contracts is positively correlated with the progress in QS rankings. The dots are universities, and this is their progress in QS rankings, and this is the number of contracts they have. And now to the most important part of the study. So this is what this quasi-experimental methods show us. So on the left, this is a slide with frequent kind of a QS-related contracts and changing QS rankings, and this green or green-blue dot means the average progress in times high red ranking for those universities who had frequent contracts. And as you see in times high red, if you look at these two groups of universities, there is almost no difference in terms of whether they improved or not. If you look at the change in QS rankings, you see that there's a big difference. And actually, so this position, this group of, according to the model, this group of universities should be somewhere here instead of somewhere here. What do you expect? So, but this is maybe, we know that QS and times high red are correlated, and even there was a nice longitudinal analysis that the correlation is more than 0.8, still a strong correlation, but you can argue that, these are different rankings and universities could change differently there. But if you look at the faculty-student ratio scores, you see that, again, there's two same groups of universities, those are frequently paid QS or not, and you see that there is no difference between these two groups in the ministry data, in the national statistics data. There's no difference in, again, in improvement in change in student faculty ratio scores in times high red rankings. Though one would argue that everyone is interested to inflate the scores, but you see that there is a huge difference in the scores in QS rankings. And those two models kind of together, actually three models together, there's a table, and if you want to look at the paper more closely, so basically these three models tell us that frequent QS related contracts, they have led to a substantially better progress in QS university rankings than you would have expected without them. So what it all means and how, and basically I think the major question here, how it all works. And here I could only, of course, hypothesize. I, again, haven't seen how it all works with my eyes, but I can speculate here if this is very similar to what's happening in corporate audit. So basically, the key mechanism is related to the way rankers evaluate and improve data coming from universities, and this is the case. This is the case for kind of a faculty-student ratio scores, and faculty-student ratio is an interesting indicator in QS rankings. So Russian universities, they have very high scores in this area, and if you sort 2021 QS rankings by this indicator, you'll see that 12 Russian universities are in the top 100 in the rankings by this indicator alone. While in general ranking, there is only one Russian university in the top 100 by the overall. So this and the progress, if you look at the progress on faculty-student ratio score, you see that it contributed substantially to the overall progress of Russian universities because it's, the weight is substantial. It weight 20%, and it's actually quite easy to change at the same time. The reporting is quite easy to change. So basically, all universities they had strong incentives to minimize the number of students they report and maximize the number of faculty they report. But for some reason, QS frequent clients, they showed more improvement on this measure than their, that occasional non-clients universities. And so this finding suggests that rankings may be distorted at the stage when rankers make decisions whether to accept or reject data on faculty-student ratios from universities. And basically, rankers may be more likely to accept inflated scores from their frequent clients than from other universities. And this is very similar that was found in kind of in corporate audit research. And there are two kind of elements that reinforce this, that support this. First, there is a large degree of ambiguity in definition of the data that universities submit to rankings, to rankers. And if you think that faculty-student ratio scores is an objective indicator, I can tell you that you can calculate it almost like in 100 different ways, and how in the way you calculate the number of students, the number of faculty, when you report it, who you include, and QS needs, its indicator to be internationally comparable, and that even increases, we can probably agree on the way we report data on national level, but since university systems are very different internationally, so it increases the ambiguity. And second, rankers are interested in maintaining continuous business relationships with universities, because this is where resources come from. And so they may be more motivated to approve data submitted by frequent clients. And usually in the business, managers are evaluated negatively on the client they lost. And so they face pressures to accept the small inaccuracies, in order to grow the business. So the study contributes to the literature on university rankings in 3 domains. I discussed this in the paper. It suggests that ranking outcomes may be affected by rankers' business models and resource dependencies. And when we discuss, biases in rankings, we should take that into account. And and when rankers' resources dependent on clients that are interested in improving their evaluations, it's become much harder to balance the goal to increase profits on one hand, and the interests of those who rely on rankings for advice. And so second, findings indicate, and there's evidence that there's a multi-million-dollar market that basically allows universities to improve their organizational status and prestige, and rankings, ranking companies, they become this powerful intermediaries in the sector, and provide high status universities with affirmation of their status, and lower status universities with opportunities to advance their status. And third, basically, the findings complements accounts how universities can influence ranking outcomes. The previous literature suggested that they can engage with audiences that influence ranking outcomes. Like, for example, with QS, universities try to engage with experts that evaluate universities' prestige, the university's reputation. And we see that in addition, they can also try to engage with rankers more directly. And this is an important also point to discuss the unintended consequences of excellence initiatives who use rankings as a performance measure, as an outcome measure. And in this case, a Russian excellence initiative, the Project 5100. And obviously, there are limitations to this study. It's not the study that concludes only a start of the discussion, and the data is very limited. It uses a relatively small sample, but the sample includes all Russian universities that participate in QS rankings. So at least for like a country and maybe similar countries, it is relevant. And again, the data, the other data is currently not available. All we can do is, is to work with the data that is available to us, because rankers currently do not disclose any financial relations with universities. And also just a couple of minutes about policy implications. What does it all mean? I was lucky to get a response from QS to the study, and actually from two different people from QS in different media outlets, and basically, to summarize these responses, it's the responses say that everything is fine, everything is working well. This particular response says that, our contracts clearly indicate that consulting work does not influence rankings, which is great. But again, if it's stated in the contract, it's not necessarily reflected in the actual practice. And again, if the literature on corporate audit teaches us something, is that unconscious self-serving bias is very hard to overcome. Even with disclosure statements, it's not going away. It's just there. It's just how the business model works. And so basically the response is everything is fine. We'll continue doing our business as usual. I was thinking about, what university sector could do. And so I would recommend basically to reconsider the use of global rankings with conflict of interest, because there at least, in the study and also the study that I mentioned, that this results could be biased by rankers' kind of business activities. I also think that for universities and also for individuals who work with, who are associated with rankings, there are considerable reputational risks of being associated with rankings that are distorted by commercial interests. The more we go, I'm pretty sure more evidence will appear on that. And I think that we as a sector, like universities and higher ed researchers, we need to discuss what's the impact of commercial rankings on higher education, and make sure that the rankings with apparent conflict of interest are no longer exist. And here you can ask me, are there any commercial rankings without the conflict of interest? And I would like to conclude with an advice from Mikhail Bulgakov. There's a famous novel. He's a Russian writer. He was a Russian writer, and almost 100 years ago, he wrote a famous novel called A Heart of a Dog. And this is a story. This is a satire where he kind of describes how a surgeon found a dog and tried to make a surgery to convert him into to create an ideal Soviet man who believes in kind of a communist ideals. And this is a story, this is his advice on using rankings with conflict of interest. So when he is talking with his colleague, he's telling him, this professor is telling him, if you care about your digestion, my advice is never read Soviet newspapers before dinner. And his colleague responds, but there are no other newspapers. And then he is advising him, in that case, don't read any at all. And if I can leave you with just one, impression from this study, don't use rankings with conflict of interest. If there are no other rankings, don't use any rankings at all. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to participate in the discussion.
And you've unleashed a torrent of questions. Igor, this is brilliant. And I'm going to deal with them in batches because we've got so much. Unfortunately, the question I was going to ask you is on the list, so that will be asked, and I won't ask it now. I'm going to take two questions first and then ask you to respond to both questioners, and we'll do the same thing with a second batch of questions. So the first one is from Rashid Al-Ruwali.
All right. Should I look?
No, I think we're waiting for Rashid to come in.
I see. Got it.
Normally, people sign in at this point. Rashid, do come in. If you don't, there he is.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, really interesting topic. Thank you for this discussion. My questions are two questions. First, this is a correlational study. So does it really imply causal effect? So if I got a contract with QS, then by implication, my ranking is going to improve. The second is, can it be possible that they really benefited from these discussions, these consultancy services, so they got better and they improved their positions? Thank you.
Wait on, Igor. Hang on, hold on. I'll bring in the second question. Miguel Lim, please.
Hi, Igor. Thanks so much for the presentation. It's great to see this being circulated. Yeah, also based on the working paper and building on the previous question, the mechanism that you explained, which could be the cause, is the sympathetic acceptance of self-reported data. I think the faculty-student ratio is what you'd identified, and the QS uses two other self-reported numbers, right? Like the international staff ratio and the international student ratio. So first of all, I just wanted to ask, how robust is that hypothesis or that explanation? So would you say that those ratios really improved for Russian universities versus other Russian universities that weren't clients of the QS? And going back to your implications section, so I know that you've had a disclaimer that rankings are kind of potentially difficult or dangerous or dysfunctional to use. But would you say then that we should use rankings if they need to be used? The rankings that don't rely on any self-reported information from the universities. And there are some rankings that do that compared to other rankings. Thank you so much, Igor. And yeah, great to see this out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, you've got those two questions.
Sure. These are great questions. I'll start with the first. Is it like really causation? So of course, in order to do a really robust causal study, we need to kind of randomly assign some universities in like an experimental group and try them, pay QS, and others, will be in a control group and compare this. Obviously, it's not possible in the actual world, and so we try to do an approximation. And as I tried to explain in the study, so what I try to do, and I will go back to my slide with the model. So what I try to estimate is this green kind of a dot, what the rankings would be for the group that QS kind of a frequent clients if they have not been paying for the services. And this is as close as we can get to kind of to the actual causal relationship between those two. And you see, and this is the chart on faculty-student ratio scores. If the actual scores, if the actual faculty-student ratio data is changing, it would have been reflected in other sources, not only in QS, and we see that in QS there's huge difference in reported kind of a faculty-student ratio scores between frequent clients and non-frequent clients. And to Miguel's questions, these are great. I was thinking doing the same thing for international student and international faculty scores. The problem is that the data for this particular two indicators are incomplete, as well as for other indicators on QS website. They publish some of the data, but not all of the data, especially for universities that are lower in rankings. And so it's just too many missing values for 2016 data, but that's a great kind of a hypothesis. I would have expected the same processes could be in place there as well. Again, I don't have any data to support that, but they also weight much low. The weight is much lower than faculty-student ratio. They weight like 5% each, and faculty-student ratio weights like 20%, which is pretty big number. So as for the use of rankings, like can you use other types of rankings? So this particular, I'm discussing the implications of this particular paper. And like this particular paper doesn't argue that no, all rankings are bad. This particular paper argues that if there's a conflict of interest, it could potentially distort rankings. So you need to be cautious in how you use commercial rankings with self-reported data. I have a personal opinion on rankings, don't use them. But this is, I'm pretty sure that there are other ways of measure, quality if you would like to. But again, this is my personal opinion, not backed by this particular findings. But since commercial rankings are pervasive, yeah, basically I suggest don't use it all.
Well, thanks for that. Now let's bring in two more questions. First one is from Masumi Mukherjee.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Igor, for this talk. I have two questions. First, I'm curious to know whether you are thinking of looking at other metrics in addition to faculty-student ratio in your future research. And also, I was curious to know from you your analysis of, why do you think there isn't a significant difference with regards to THE compared to QS in the model that you showed? What would be your analysis? What would be your understanding?
Right.
And the second question is from Phil Olpak. Yeah, no, Marek Quick had the same trouble. He kept on wanting to jump in after every question.
Yeah.
I can understand that. No,
academic reflexes.
Yeah. Hello, Phil.
Hello.
We can hear you.
I feel you muted.
Phil, we can see you're coming onto screen, but we can't hear you. I'm happy to. Phil may have a sound problem at his end. Well, maybe we'll ask you to answer Masumi's question after all, Igor, and Phil can come in a second.
Yeah. So as for other data, again, I'm happy to analyze any other data available. If QS or any other rankers would like to provide the data on contracts with universities, it will be possible to analyze the whole data set. And maybe I'm wrong, actually. Maybe if you analyze like full data set, you won't see any substantial effects there. I just don't know. This data is not disclosed. I imagine rankers would never disclose it, but if they will, that would be great. I think that would be great for transparency and for the sector in general. To have this data and to analyze this data. As for the difference with the THE in student faculty ratio scores, I think what could be happening here is that universities who would like to report larger faculty student ratio scores, QS frequent clients could do that for QS, but not times higher ed. So they maybe tried, but maybe they got rejected. Maybe they didn't even try. It's hard to say. But in the data, I see that they were successful in doing that for QS, but not for times higher ed, and also not for national statistics, which is like not related to any other to any rankings. So that's what I think going on here.
Thank you. Thank you for responding, Igor.
I'll put a message out to Phil Olpak so he can come in, when he's ready. We've got Julian Jarkman with us, Igor, and I think he'd like to come in at this point. So happy to bring him in.
Hi, Igor. Hi, everybody. So yeah, the point I was raising is more of a comment, and it's maybe taking a bit of a distance of what's next, what we should do next now. And it's the idea that here the problem that you show is QS is on the one hand is a judge by ranking institution, and on the other hand is a party by giving advices on how to improve your ranking. And this is exactly the same scandal that we had with Enron back in about 20 years ago in the US. And back then, back in the days before the scandal that was taking place with Enron, we had the strategy and the auditing aspect of firms were done by the same institutions. Following the Enron scandal, we've had rules that have been set up. And those would have said, well, we need to separate the two. So, and how can you separate that? In the US, in the UK, they say, well, if you are doing audit, you're only doing audit. If you are doing strategy, you're only doing strategy. And that's usually one of the claim that QS and THE also did as a response. They say, well, it's split, but they say it's split, but it's still the same board of trustees, it's still the same people that are making the decision. So I think that the big issue there is that we should set up rules and create a wall in between within the institution. And I think it should be between two different institutions that should do the consultancy or the advertising on the one hand and the ranking on the other end. But the problem here is that there's nobody governing the higher education world. I mean, there are institutions in the UK, there are institutions in the US, there are many institutions in Europe, but there's no governing body setting up rules. And I think that's the big issue. And I'm an economist, so I'm a bit biased, but I'm not sure the market will self-regulate. And so the question is, and so now that was my comment, so now is my question. So what should come up next now?
Right. Yeah, thank you so much. I think this is a great area to discuss. And first of all, I've read in chat, I'm so sorry about calling you a French economist.
No problem.
Belgian economist. Yeah, so sorry. But it's, first of all, great to see you. And I really like your, your paper, and it's amazing how those two kind of got published at the same time. It's interesting idea about regulation. So I would rather, I don't know if any governments would like to regulate rankers, and since these are global rankings, which bodies would be a good regulator for that? That goes beyond like national borders, and I would rather think that there should be other ways of measuring quality, and rankings are so limited in how they do that. And I think they don't reflect the way higher ed sector is working, and there are not such big differences between. So first of all, universities don't change every year. Like we all, like most of us who work at the universities, we see that every year universities are not that different, and also they're not like. I don't think that they are not ranked one to each other. It's a much more complicated structure in how they are organized. So I think there are just much better ways of doing that than in rankings. But whether these ways would be appealing to to prospective students, to the public who would like to learn about the universities, that's the key question. And I think regulation is an interesting idea. I just don't know how it will work.
Thanks for the answer, and thanks for the question. Phil Altbach is back online. So Phil, can you come in now?
Yes, thank you very much.
Igor,
thank you so much for the really interesting analysis and the comments that it has engendered. I have a couple of comments and a sort of big question, which you sort of already answered. The first comment is, as you know, I've been on the Russian government's 5100 commission. And early on, we urged the commission to forbid the participating universities from paying the rankers for consultancy services. And that was not listened to by us. And they did it. And I think it's highly unfortunate. The second point, which Igor just mentioned, is I wish we could think of a way of doing these kind of evaluations other than rankings. I can't, nobody else has. OECD tried a while ago and spent a whole bunch of money on it, but we don't have anything else. And as Igor points out, the public out there, meaning students and their families, and governments want these, these kind of rankings so that they can benchmark themselves. And I know that's how the Shanghai rankings, which have not been mentioned in this discussion, got started, many years ago. So it's all an immensely interesting, set of issues that we're facing here with, I don't think, any really good answer. And so my big question to Igor, which he sort of mentioned, is where do we go from here?
Right. So I think, so my view on that is that there are a lot of people who claim that, and these people are in the audience, so that rankings are here to stay. I think it's just, I don't think it's true. there are a lot of things that are changing in the sector, and some things are some things do change. And I think if we have biased measures and the sector knows that these measures are biased, and it's just one study, there are whole sorts of other biases and we all know them. But so it's in our kind of a power to think of how this could be organized. Again, I don't have a solution, right now, but what I think we could do, again, as a sector, is to inform these users of rankings is that, the results they see might be influenced by, commercial interests of those who publish these results. And this could be a good, starting point. It doesn't offer the alternative immediately, but I really like the U multi-rank initiative, as principle, as the, database instead of, just rankings, where you can compare institutions. And that could be an alternative. Again, there are many reasons why, U multi-rank is not as competitive as, as this major rankings that we discussed, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to work. Sometimes, it just takes time.
Now we've got a lot of questions and we're not going to get through them all. So what I'm going to do is let about 4 people come in and give you a chance to reply to them all, Igor, and that'll take us close to the end. We usually stray over the hour, but only to about 4 or 5 past, because then we lose our audience. So let me start that process with Seyong Lee.
Yes, thank you, Simon. Thank you, Igor. Wonderful presentation. My question is not that big. So what do you think, what kind of impact would you like for your research to have on students in higher education, especially international students, because they have such a big faith in this ranking? So why do you think that international students have such a big faith in that ranking? And also my second question is about that small sample that you already mentioned from Russian institutions. How much implications and applications can be driven for other countries from your study on Russian studies?
Okay, we've got that. No more double questions, please, folks. Johnny Rich.
Yeah, thanks very much, Simon, and thank you, Igor, for great research. I wanted to ask you to go beyond being a researcher and ask you about the motivations that you think might be going on here. Do you think it's that this is undeliberate, it's bad design on the part of rankers, and that they are well motivated and could be encouraged to address these issues? Or do you think that there is something corrupt, either immoral, amoral, or even illegal going on?
Okay, that's a good question to sit on. David Law, please.
Thank you, Simon. There's lots of ranking systems. It was a great presentation, Igor. Thank you very much. The 2 that you've mentioned, and what's characteristic about QS is the large percentage that depends upon reputation. There's a third international system in the Shanghai consultancy, ARWU, that Phil has mentioned. There are more, of course, but I find that scholarship systems in other countries often use these 3 systems. Do you have anything about the ARWU system?
Okay, now one more, Igor. Judith Eaton, are you there, please?
Yes, I am, Simon, and thank you, and good to see you. And Igor, thank you for your work. Why do we think that rankings measure quality? I know the public thinks that, but why do we professionals in higher education think that? I don't think they do, and I think that with regard to rankings, we are dealing with a challenge in part because we haven't offered any kind of alternative notion of quality that has been widely accepted, even within our profession. Quickly, are the institutions that do have business dealings, contracts with one of the ranking organizations, making that public when they announce their rankings or use their rankings? Do the companies and the institutions make that public? And wouldn't it be helpful if they were transparent about the business relationships as a routine matter?
Good. Thanks, Judith. And I'm going to bring in Eva Hildebrand for the very final question. Eva, are you there? Can we reach you?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, because I'm traveling at the moment, so my internet connection is a bit bad. Thank you, Igor, for the presentation. It was very interesting. I wondered, since you took the student-faculty ratio, which is weighed against the number of academic staff, and there is another indicator weighed against academic staff, which is the citation rate. So if you raise the number of academic staff to get a better student-faculty ratio, the score for the citation rate will go down. What did you observe in this case? Was this a problem for the Russian universities that you observed, or didn't it happen? So I was wondering.
Yeah.
Okay, Igor, the floor is yours again. That's it.
Can I answer that?
Answer them all.
Okay, yeah, perfect. There are 7. All right, I'll start from the last because it's like a technical question. So basically, the citation rates for Russian universities are very low. And if you divide 0 by something, then you'll get 0, regardless of how large your faculty number is. So from strategy perspective, increasing the number of faculty is much better because the weight is much larger, and you don't get a significant improve on that citation rate score with that. So as for I'll start from the order. So the international students who believe in this rankings. So I think we need to be more proactive in kind of informing the students about, and prospective students about, the flaws and biases of rankings and the limitations they have, to make educational choices. And actually, I think rankings are influential also because nobody looks at the methodology. Nobody looks how they are calculated, how the sausage is made. And I myself publish a rankings on every April 1st. There is a rankings that I publish called Fortunate 5100 Universities, and the rank is completely random. So and it's clearly stated in the methodology, but every April 1st, I've got some questions, it's, or a celebration, it's, and it's because people just don't look at the methodology. As for a small sample, I wish I have a larger sample. I don't know how it translates to other countries, because if there are countries, just let me know if there are countries where universities are reporting their kind of contracts. If there is a case and it's possible to find a data set, then I'll be happy to do more analysis with that and see if it's also affecting outcomes. As for the kind of whether this is a corruption or whether this is a bias, again, I don't think this is a story about corruption because I'm informed, with the studies on corporate audit, and of course there are sometimes cases when there is a corruption, but at the same time, the biases that are happening on a much larger scale, they are driven not by corruption, but by this unconscious, self-serving bias that this companies usually have, and I think that this is what's happening here rather than corruption, because these are publicly available contracts. It's not something, shady going on that I identified. So why do we believe that rankings measure quality? I don't. I think there's a great saying like about a drunken man who lost his keys, and he is looking under the light because this is where the light is, and not this is because, you know, this is where he lost the keys. And I think rankings do the same thing. Basically, they combine indicators that are available, very bad indicators, and they try to do rankings with this bad indicators. And I think they're not, you know, they don't measure quality. And yes, there was a question about transparency. What was the question? Sorry.
It was my question, I believe, Igor, and that is, could we establish, or is there a practice such that for both the ranking organizations and the institutions, they make transparent whether or not they have any business relationships with the ranking organization?
I think that would be great. As a researchers, we would have much more data to analyze, and others would see, you know, which universities contract with them, if rankers would do that. But these are private companies, like it's, and maybe this is something, you know, to Julian's point about regulation. Right now, there are private companies, they are in their own right not to disclose anything, but at the same time, they trying to convince everyone that, you know, visas, you know, these evaluations are objective, and they don't, I wasn't able to find any, you know, mention of conflict of interest on their website, let alone that, you know, they charge, you know, they contract universities. So if this will happen, I'd be glad, but I'm not sure it will, unless again, maybe there is a regulation or some other pressures from the sector, you know, to do that.
Igor, we need to give you a chance to go and have a cup of morning coffee and start to wake up. I mean, it's really generous of you to have got up at 6 a.m. and done this. And I mean, you've stimulated enormous interest, and we regret that we didn't have a chance to bring in Yusuf Oldak and Aki Yanazawa and Rosemary Deem, who would have also asked you very interesting questions. I mean, this is clearly a debate which has got lots of legs. You've really started something here, or I should say, you know, you and Julian, between you, have started something really quite important. And, you know, we've finally got the stage where we've got something to say that's concrete and useful about this problem of conflict of interest. I mean, I think a lot of us have been aware of it. I mean, platform capitalism is by its nature tends to evade regulation. It's across the regulatory sites. It's international and global in scale. It's quite difficult to pin down. And unless the users, and in this case, the institutions do have some power, unless they band together and develop a certain ethical framework in which to work, and they can enforce that, and they can do that in more than one country at the same time, unless that begins to happen, I don't think we're going to be able to modify the space. We can't look to governments to sort this out for us. So it is a matter of self-regulation, where I think the US is probably more advanced in how to do that. Judith's organization, particularly SHIA and elsewhere, knows more about that than most of us. But this, you know, thank you very much for your contribution today. And hopefully we'll have you back to talk about these issues and others again. Colleagues, the next webinar in our series is next Tuesday on the 1st of June, and we're going to look at the early moves in the late 19th century to advance women's equality in education, a long struggle, which of course is not completely finished. But the early stages are very inspiring. We're going to have Eric Liebeck to talk to us about his research in that area. So look forward to seeing you next Tuesday, where we talk about agenda and universities in the late 19th century. And we thank Igor again. Thank you very much, and good luck. Keep this going.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Thanks, everyone.